Good afternoon, and welcome to Breaking Free, Loving Me Inside and Out, featuring Kemba Smith. I'm Risa Davis, and it's my honor to serve as the president of the Chicago chapter of the LINKS Incorporated. We are a chapter of an international organization of African American women dedicated to friendship and service. You may have heard of us around our work we are doing to promote mental wellness. You may have attended one of our debutante cotillions, or perhaps even danced with us at one of our social events, pre-COVID, of course. Today's annual speaker series event is part of our Links to Hope program, which is focused on lowering the stigma of discussing and seeking help to combat mental health challenges and educating our community on the importance of mental wellness. We are looking forward to today's discussion and are very excited to bring you our speaker, Kemba Smith. Her story was brought to our attention by our program chair, Annette Johnson, who heard Ms. Smith speak at one of our conferences. She came back so excited and urged us to bring Ms. Smith to Chicago. Of course, we had hoped to do so in person last year, but we are happy that we've been able to pivot to this virtual experience. Having read Ms. Smith's book, Poster Child, I know that you are in for a compelling story and an engaging Q&A about self-esteem, choices, and the criminal justice system. My thanks to our chapter members for supporting this event, particularly our event chair, Sherma Wise Thomas, and her planning committee. Thanks also to our moderator, Taylor Wilson Thompson, the daughter of one of our chapter members, and to Dr. Martin Hill, our medical expert. We also have several members of our organization in today's audience, including our Central Area Director, Monica Allen, and our own chapter member, Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. We also thank an extra special participating member, our 11th National President, Patricia Russell McLeod, who you will meet very shortly. She will introduce our speaker and tell you a little bit about Kemba's special connection to the LINKS Incorporated. We thank all of you for joining, especially our youth. Our goal is to share this important story of personal resilience and family and community support following unimaginable circumstances, and to inspire us all. We hope you will ask questions and share your takeaways with others, particularly young people, and read the book and learn what you can do to work on some of the issues presented. Thank you again for joining. Please follow us on social media and look out for our next event as the Chicago chapter continues the work of positively impacting our community.
We are especially honored this afternoon to have a woman introducing our guest speaker who has a very, very, very special relationship with her. Patricia Russell McLeod, Esquire, is the 11th National President of the LINKS Incorporated. She is an attorney and nationally known speaker, sought out by Fortune 500 corporations and organizations worldwide to craft and deliver messages to motivate her listeners. She's regarded by many as a master of the spoken word. And while she can certainly impact with her words, as you will soon hear, it's her actions and her determination to help save our youth that has changed lives, including the life of our guest speaker. Please join us in welcoming Patricia Russell McLeod.
Good afternoon. Kemba Smith, a Richmond, Virginia, high achiever, pretty popular. Kemba, not likely to be abused or misused by a boyfriend, but she was. Kemba, unlikely to be convicted and sentenced to federal prison for more years than she was old, but she was. Not likely to have a kingpin leader of a $4 million crack cocaine drug ring and one of the FBI's 15 most wanted as a boyfriend, but she did. Kemba's case was intentionally focused upon that quagmire of competing essentials, Kemba was arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced, and the prosecutor stated that Kemba never sold, handled, or took drugs. Stay woke. Know this: everybody does not deserve a front row seat in your life. As the 11th international president of the LINKS Incorporated, 16,000 positioned and placed women civic organization knew that they needed to know the Kemba case. Kemba, a naive college freshman at the prestigious Hampton University, the only child of exceptionally loving parents, innocent, in love, with love, and vulnerable. Kemba could have been your daughter, your granddaughter, niece, sister, friend, cousin. Is that your cousin? No, that's not my cousin, but that's my cousin. She could have been a family member. So at the 1998 National Assembly, Boston, Massachusetts, the LINKS Incorporated, we featured a mock trial of the Kemba case. 3 sitting jurists sitting en banc. The lawyer's lawyer, attorney Elaine Jones, then director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. The members listened and realized from her brilliantly argued Kemba's case that Kemba made bad choices. She didn't know that she didn't know that she didn't know. Her safe zone was explosive. It was a no-win, set to ignite at any time. Her boyfriend was not a friend, he was a felon. Kemba was a model prisoner, and with the leadership of Dr. Barbara Dixon Simpkins, the 12th international president of the LINKS Inc., and a host of like-minded women's organizations, turned a moment into a movement. Free Kemba, free Kemba. On Christmas Day, my car phone rang and the caller said, "Attorney Pat Russell McLeod, this is Kemba. President Bill Clinton pardoned me, and I have been released, and I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Today, Kemba is a college graduate, an international motivational speaker, from the White House to the United States Congress to the United Nations. She prioritizes criminal justice, not just for some, but for everybody. Everybody. Mandatory drug sentencing, women and incarceration, felony disenfranchisement, and re-entry. Kemba is my mentee, and every day, she makes us deservedly proud. Lessons learned. Everybody does not deserve a front row seat in your life. Everybody can't be in your posse. Stay woke. Check your perimeter. Be your best self. Don't talk about it. Be about it. Whatever you're going through, never, 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 never give up. So Burton Braley said to us that if you want a thing bad enough, to go out and fight for it, to work day and night for it, to give your time and your peace and your sleep for it, if gladly you'll fret for it and sweat for it and fret for it, if you'll simply go after that thing that you want with all of your capacity, strength and sagacity, faith, hope, and confidence, and stern pertinacity, if neither cold nor famine, nor gaunt, nor sickness, nor pain, or body, or brain, if none of those things can keep you away from that thing that you want, if dogged and grim, you will besiege and beset it, surely you will get it. Go for it, because I'm a visual learner, and perhaps you are too. So how about us listening to Kemba Smith tell us her story from behind the prison walls? You say what, Kemba?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be able to spend this afternoon with the Chicago LINKS Incorporated. And first and foremost, I just have to give God all the glory an honor because it was actually intended for me to have been in prison for 24 and a half years. I spent 6.5 years in prison, and I was released in December of 2000. And so for me, it's no coincidence. And so I'm thankful for Mrs. Patricia Russell McLeod for her beautiful introduction. And it brings me great honor and pleasure to have her introduced because this year it marks 20 years that I've been released from federal prison. And so I know that Miss McLeod saw me as her child in 1998. And I just thank God for her leadership, for Elaine Jones bringing my story to her attention, for this organization as a whole, taking it upon themselves to lift me up, but not only me, but to lift others up as well. And I'll share that later in my presentation. But understand that there are many people that I could thank, but I also want to make sure that I thank former past president Dr. Barbara Simpkins. And also, I definitely want to thank President Risa Davis for having me speak for the Chicago chapter and for all the committee members that were a part of this process and planning. But last but not least, I definitely have to thank the current national president, Kimberly Jeffries Leonard. I had the opportunity to meet her, and it was just awe-inspiring for me to hear her say one of the reasons why she became a link was because of how they took on advocating for my release. So I'm very grateful for this organization's leadership and for your continued support. You have helped a woman, actually, December 22nd, 2000, when I was released from federal prison, I was a broken woman. And so I thank God that you all still embraced me, supported me, and empowered me because, we're having a real conversation today. But, I can remember when I was invited to the national conference after I had been fresh out of prison. And I looked at the audience. And for those of you all who don't know, the LINKS organization are movers and shakers, Black women that are doing big things across the country. And so for me to look in the audience and see all these women, some of the time I asked, God, why am I even here? But I soon came to realize that they embraced me and they empowered my voice and helped heal me to be able to continue to share this story and not feel any kind of way because I'm doing what God has orchestrated me to do, the reason why he opened those prison doors. So I hope me sharing this story can be an inspiration for others today. And the reason why I have been sharing this story is because, number one, I don't believe each and every young person has to make each and every mistake there is to make in life, that they can hear another person's story and make a determination that they don't want to go down that same path. And then the second reason why I've been sharing this story is because I left other Kemba Smiths behind in federal prison. And I know, President Obama, he released some people through commutation. President Trump, even through his First Step Act legislation, people were released. But there are still others. In particular, I have a friend, Michelle West. She's from Michigan, and she's still serving time in federal prison as a first-time offender, and she was given a double life sentence. So for me, it was important for me to still be a human face to this issue, and I've been continuing to advocate for others. And so I want to move forward in thanking my parents. I know they are in this dialogue, and so for me, my parents are the true heroes to my story. They raised me. I was raised in a two-parent home. They middle class. They provided the best for me. And, I know for the young people that are watching today, I know when I was your age, I probably was not as grateful as I should have been because I thought my parents were too strict. They were going to call over to that friend's house if I was going over to my friend's house to make sure that their parents were home. And so I felt like they didn't understand what was going on with the times then. And I allowed my friends to be my confidants. And so I strongly encourage young people to, number one, understand that your family, your parents, whoever it is that's raising you, it doesn't have to be your biological parents, whoever's that invest in that time, love, and energy into you, always respect and reverence those relationships. And so in growing up, I was a debutante. I was in the marching band. I was involved in several activities, Girl Scouts. If you see in this picture on the right-hand side, I've got my lopsided haircut, but understand, even with that ordeal, with that picture, I can remember my mom getting so upset with me. And that's probably when I started to rebel a little bit in high school. But she got so upset because I got this lopsided haircut. But that's when I started wanting to be a part of the in crowd. And I stayed involved. I basically kept a balance between school and my social life. And so when it came time for me to decide where I wanted to go to school, I had the choice of Radford University or Hampton University in Virginia. And so I can remember going to visit Radford University's campus. And when I visit the campus, I was just like, I don't know, maybe we'll see, because this is somewhat like my high school experience. And basically, I went to predominantly, white schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And then when my parents took me to go visit Hampton University, the first and only thing that was on my mind when I stepped on Hampton University's campus was, oh my goodness, look at all these fine Black men. I didn't care what I was going to major in, what Hampton was good at. I just knew that that was the school for me, and it was about an hour and a half away from my parents. And so I want to do a disclaimer for Hampton University, though, as I share this story. Understand that my home by the sea, Hampton University, or any HBCU, what happened to me at Hampton University could have happened to me at Columbia University. So any young person or parent that's contemplating, well, maybe I shouldn't send my kid to Hampton University, understand that Hampton University is an institution of excellence, and I would encourage that opportunity for anyone. But at Hampton is where I met Peter, and he was the drug dealer that I got involved with. And initially he was Mr. Knight in Shining Armor. And I can remember meeting him, and he asked me what my name was. And I can remember having this warm, fuzzy feeling inside because he actually asked me my name. And let me back up, during my pre-college, because I started Hampton, I went to an orientation program during the summer before my freshman year. And ultimately, I would see him come on campus. I would see him drive in different cars and see him pick up other girls during the fall semester. I would see him pick up other girls who were on the dean's list, who were in sororities. And I kind of wondered, who this guy was. And he seemed like, I can remember being by the student grill. We didn't have the wonderful student commons that Hampton University has now, but I would see him by the student grill, and there were guys that would gather around him. And, he just seemed like the happening person. And eventually it became a point where he had a conversation with me, and I had this warm, fuzzy feeling inside because he asked me what my name's, and we had this conversation. But understand, that's where the low self-esteem, low self-confidence sunk in. And don't ask me why I didn't join Hampton University's band, because I was in the band in high school. HBCUs are known to have some of the baddest bands in the land. But ultimately, when I started Hampton University, my focus was wanting to fit in and wanting to be a part of the cool crowd. And so eventually, after we met, Peter and I were in this 3.5-year relationship. And there were red flags. I mean, how many of you all know about red flags in relationships? And basically, I didn't pay attention to those red flags. And I can remember, you know, when you go through college life, sometimes your finances are a little tight. And I can remember there was a friend of mine who danced for Ebony Fire, and she did hair in her dorm room. And I can remember getting my hair done and flipping through a magazine, and she was asked me, she said, Kemba, you know, I heard you're dating Peter. Khalif was what his street name was. And I'm flipping the magazine and I'm saying, yeah, smiling. And she was just like, girl, don't you know he's crazy? And when she said that, I just put a smile on my face and chuckled. And I said, girl, yeah, he is crazy. But I didn't realize what she was trying to tell me was that he was crazy, crazy. So I missed that red flag altogether. And so it came a point in time where Peter was physically and emotionally abusive to me. And I didn't see it coming the first time when it happened. And after it happened, I was basically, you know, scared to death. Um, and I can't, we don't have enough time for me to go through actually what happened. You would have to, you know, get my book to read that. But it was a abusive situation where he strangled me to the point where blood vessels had popped all over my face, and he beat me on my body. And I can remember afterwards, there was no feeling of, you know, ooh, I love you. I was scared to death. I was traumatized. I was scared to move. I can remember him crying in my lap afterwards, telling me how he didn't want me to be afraid of him. And, you know, I had it in my mind that as soon as I got back to Hampton University, that I never wanted to see him again. And then later came the I'm sorry's, it'll never happen again. And I still wasn't like 100%, you know, detracted from the fact that he was crazy. But it came a point where, and this is where young people, you need to be careful of who it is that you associate yourself with. Now, I love, you know, my clique of girlfriends that I had while I was at Hampton University, but to be quite frank, all of us were a little lost. And so I can remember after that first abusive incident, he took me over to my girlfriend's house. And when I walked in, I would have thought one of my girlfriends would have come up to me, because you could tell that something had happened to me. And you would have thought one of them would have said, girl, what happened? Did he beat you? You know, what's wrong? But none of my girlfriends said anything to me when I came into their presence after this first altercation. And so I ended up leaving and getting in the car with him and driving, because we were in Philadelphia at the time, and drove back to Hampton University. And that's when the insecure feelings came in, the fact that my girlfriends didn't even say anything to me. So I became embarrassed and ashamed. And that when things happen in darkness and you continue to remain silent, that's when you start brushing things under the rug. And so ultimately it came to a point where when we did get back to Hampton University, I strongly encourage, you know, anyone that may be going through or have gone through something like this, go to counseling. Like the first thing I should have done when I stepped foot back on Hampton University's campus was I should have gone to women's health, women's counseling, to let someone know, because I didn't feel comfortable going to my parents and saying to them, you know, mom, dad, I just, you know, felt like somebody was about to kill me, you know, in Philadelphia. And so I didn't talk to anyone about it. And basically, I should have walked away, and I didn't. So I strongly encourage anyone that's in that situation to please get help. Don't just rely on your girlfriends to talk. You need to talk to a professional, because sometimes your girlfriends, they may be used to that situation. Because I had one of my girlfriends where she had been in an abusive relationship, and she may have thought that that was just something that just happens. And then you could have a girlfriend that could say, or a male friend that could say, well, you need to get out of it right away. But depending on how crazy that person is, it may not be the safest thing to do. You may need to talk to a professional, figure out how to safely get out of that situation. And so ultimately, I ended up going back to Hampton, and I continued to be in this relationship with him. And we were in this relationship for 3.5 years. And then eventually things escalated. And never in a million years would I thought that I would have been with someone who took another person's life. So he was a drug dealer. He was dealing drugs. He started in the Tidewater area, and then he moved to the Charlotte, North Carolina area. And there was a particular point where the authorities, the federal government, they wanted to talk to me because they assumed or knew that he had killed his best friend. So I was actually with someone who had killed his best friend because he thought his best friend was cooperating with the authorities. At that particular time, I couldn't believe that I was actually in this situation, didn't know how to navigate to get out of it. And I can continue to, I felt like even when I went and was questioned by federal authorities, mind you, it was about 8 DEA agents and a prosecutor, I was scared to death. I was involved in something that had snowballed that was bigger than me. So basically, I just told them everything that Peter had instructed me to tell them. And so things escalated with him and the federal government, and I ended up being with him on the run. And we went from Houston, Texas to San Diego, California to Arizona, and then to Seattle, Washington. And understand, once we got to Houston, Texas, I had no idea of what his situation was. Basically, I left my parents' home, and I can remember praying on my knees and, being confused, not sure of if I should go meet him, because basically he told me he wanted me to come meet him. And because of the abuse and the type of mental and emotional control that he had with me, I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm sure the mental health expert can help you guys understand later after my talk. But basically, when I got to Houston, Texas, you're thinking, oh, well, girl, you were just this drug dealer's girlfriend. You were probably living the life going from city to city. No, when I got to Houston, Texas, there was no him picking me up in a fancy car. We actually walked on foot to the apartment that he had gotten, which was in the 3rd Ward of Houston, Texas, which was one of the roughest areas in Houston. And I can remember walking up, there were bars on the doors, bars on the window, roaches in the apartment. And I really couldn't believe where we were, and going from city to city. It was in a U-Haul truck. And eventually, when we got to Seattle, Washington, was when I realized that I was pregnant. And I thank God. I do believe that, things should be done in a traditional manner, but I thank God for my son and me being pregnant, because that's when I realized that I needed to get myself back home to my parents. And when I took a 3-day train ride back home, my biggest fear was not, oh my gosh, what am I about to walk into? Because basically the federal government had indicted me. My biggest fear was my dad's going to kill me coming home pregnant. And so I took this 3-day train ride home. And when I got home, my parents welcomed me with open arms. And that's why I say my parents are my heroes. And when they welcomed me with open arms, they told me that I had been indicted, that I had to turn myself in. And my parents thought it was about who you knew. And they had gotten an attorney who was friends with the prosecutor. And that attorney guaranteed me that if I turned myself in, that I would get a bond to give birth to my son. And then he also said that if I pled guilty, that I would only get 24 months. So that prosecutor is called prosecutorial misconduct. He reneged on both of those promises. So when I turned myself in on September 1st of 1994, I did not walk out of that courtroom. And so choices and consequences, never in a million years, young people, would I have thought when I was dreaming about my future life would I have thought that I would have been pregnant with my first child and be in those type circumstances where, you know, I was given snacks of a cold bologna sandwich, where I had to sleep on this steel bunk with a thin mattress, where when I had to go to my weekly doctor's appointments, I'm handcuffed and shackled in an orange jumpsuit and having to go sit in a clinic where people were staring at me like I was a public spectacle, wondering what kind of crime did I commit. And so ultimately, I ended up giving birth to my son while I was incarcerated. And that was probably the lowest of the low of my experiences while being incarcerated, because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I turned myself in, I pled guilty, and then I gave birth to my son. And so in that last slide, you saw me, and I haven't shared this with too many audiences, but that was a painful experience. That was the lowest of my low. And so I thank God for him giving me the strength to get through that. I thank God for my parents who still stood by me. But ultimately, after my 2-day hospital stay, I had to go back to federal prison. And before going back to federal prison, 5 minutes after I gave birth to my son, the U.S. Marshal stormed my hospital room and said that I couldn't have any visitors. They kicked my parents out. They said that my leg had to be handcuffed and shackled to the bed at all times, and that I had to have 2 correctional officers guarding me. And so for me, that was again one of the most oppressive experiences. And then to know that eventually I was going to have to let my baby boy go and go back to prison in a cold jail cell, and not knowing what my future was going to be. And not only not knowing what my future was going to be, I don't know how many of you all have ever gone to visit anyone in a county jail, but ultimately there was no physical contact. So me crying in that picture holding my son was because I didn't know when I was going to hold my son again. It wasn't until months later, when I was transferred to a federal prison, not in Virginia, not on the East Coast where my parents lived. I was transferred to a federal prison that was in California, over 2,000 miles away. So again, I thank God, I thank my parents, because they did what they had to do to come see me in California so that I could be reunited with my son. And so after that, I ended up being transferred to another prison in Connecticut. And basically, Connecticut and California were the only 2 prisons in which I could be incarcerated, because I had been sentenced to 24 and a half years. And ultimately, at my sentencing hearing, there was a domestic violence expert too that spoke to the domestic violence and abuse with my case. And my 86-year-old judge did not care. Actually, there were witnesses in the courtroom that wrote letters to the clerk to tell them that they witnessed my judge sleeping during this expert testimony. So ultimately, I didn't know when I was going to hold, touch, feel my son. I went to the prison in California, and I was transferred to Connecticut. And in Connecticut, that's when Elaine Jones, well, before Elaine Jones, there was a magazine called Emerge Magazine. And so I want to share the importance and the power of telling your story. And so while I was in federal prison, I was scared to death of being offered to go public with my story, because number one, we know how we can be in the Black community about each other and how judgmental we can be. And so I wasn't more so worried about how people were going to judge me. I was more concerned about how people were going to judge my parents, because my parents were the ones that were out there. But I thank God again, my parents were happy for me to move forward. Not happy is not the word. They were okay with me sharing my story in this publication. And it was because of this Emerge article that made Black America, because Emerge was a Black American magazine, and George Curry was the publisher. I thank God for him publishing the story and putting my face on the front cover. But ultimately, this story launched the NAACP Legal Defense Fund taking on my case. Now, let me back up. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund taking on a drug case of someone who made poor choices with a drug dealer, and they decided that they were going to take on my case because Elaine Jones, who was director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, she was from Norfolk, Virginia, which is where I was sentenced. And ultimately, she came to federal prison to tell me that she was going to do everything she could. And basically, she wanted to see her homegirl receive justice. And because of that, there was a movement. And I know it was stated earlier, but Elaine Jones was a member of the LINKS, a member of the Deltas, a member of the National Council of Negro Women. And so ultimately, I have to highlight this, and I know Sister Patricia McLeod said this earlier, but I don't know if the audience realizes this, but the LINKS National Organization, under the leadership of Patricia Russell McLeod, they actually launched my clemency campaign in 1998 at their national conference in Boston, Massachusetts. And I just thank God for her leadership and wanting to come forward and launch this campaign. And ultimately, this campaign was run like a presidential campaign. And my parents were heavily involved. We didn't know whether or not it was going to happen. But ultimately, on December 22nd, 2000, is when I received a miracle, a modern day miracle from the president of the United States, President Bill Clinton, where he released me from federal prison. And I have to back up in the fact that I was sentenced to 24 and a half years, young people. 24, I was turned myself in 1994, and I wasn't supposed to be released until January of 2016. And so ultimately, no one, LDF didn't know if I was going to be released from federal prison. But once those prison doors opened, I knew that I couldn't ball up in the corner. I couldn't be my former Kemba Smith. Not only did I have the label of ex-felon, ex-convict, ex-offender, victim from domestic violence, I had to let go of all of those labels. And I needed to rise to the occasion of why God opened those prison doors. Because these organizations, all these Black women's organizations, they came on board to support me, not because they felt sorry for poor little me or because they felt sorry for my parents. Back then, the fastest growing population within prison were Black women. And so these organizations had hoped that my case would set a precedent for first-time nonviolent drug offenders in bringing people home with these long sentences, with this war on drugs, which was mostly a war on people of color. And so when I walked out of those prison doors, it was almost like if you've seen 12 Years a Slave and you've seen people and you've seen that scene where he rides off the plantation with Brad Pitt, I felt what he felt in the fact that I was leaving so many others behind. And so I knew that I had to publicly speak out about my ordeal and continue to be a human face for drug sentencing gone wrong. And so ultimately, I ended up working at a law firm, and I ended up connecting with some of the organizations that helped to bring me home. And so there was this transformation to success. And so I worked with various organizations, Families Against Mandatory Minimum, the ACLU. There's a group called the Justice Roundtable. And basically, we help with the passage of the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 that President Obama signed that reduced the crack cocaine disparity from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. I also work with the NAACP National Office, and Ben Jealous was the president of the organization at the time, where we dealt with felony disenfranchisement laws across the country. And that's where I had the opportunity to travel to Geneva, Switzerland, to talk about voter suppression in the United States. But ultimately, it was me owning my story, owning my hurt, my pain, and using the trauma and what I had gone through in order to lead other people, in order to educate other people, in order to prevent the school to prison pipeline so that young people can make healthy choices, in order to change the laws. So for me, that was my passion. And so in me taking ownership of that, and I don't want to make it seem like it was easy for me to transition to success. I went to counseling. You know, people in our community, some of the time they shun away from counseling because number one, you don't want people to know your business. Number two, you don't want anybody to think you're weak, because we as Black women, we always want to wear these masks like everything is hunky-dory and fine. But I had to go to counseling and heal. And not only through counseling, but also, again, like organizations such as this that valued and understood my story and wanted this story to go out to the masses. And so through my advocacy, you know, I thank God for his grace. His grace is sufficient. Since my release from prison, I was able to meet President Clinton, and when former Governor Terry McAuliffe was running for governor in 2016, I was able to meet President Obama in the White House, and you'll see that in a second on the screen. And President Obama invited formerly incarcerated people to the White House, where there was a conference, and I had the opportunity to meet him. And then in 2019, the governor of Virginia actually appointed me to the Virginia Parole Board. And so here I am, working in spaces, sitting at tables that I never thought I could be in. But I give God the glory, and I give people that have supported me along the way, I just want to say thank you, because I could not be here on my own. And so in moving forward, you know, I'm grateful for the fact that Moving Pictures Institute, they are actually producing a film about my life story. And I'm working with Christine Swanson. She actually wrote the Clark Sisters movie, and you'll see that slide as well. But I'm grateful to be working with her. And I also have my book Poster Child that's been mentioned. And I've had the opportunity to meet with Elaine Jones. There was a slide with that was just shown. This is Christina Swanson, and Moving Picture Institute is who I'll be working with. And BET Networks, it'll be shown on their network first. But you'll see Elaine Jones, where my parents and I had the opportunity to meet with her at LDF's office. But last, I know I need to come to a close. I also have my foundation, and actually next week, February the 20th, we'll be having our 5th session, and we'll be talking about Black women and mass incarceration. But to close, I just want to end with a quote from Chicago's own Michelle Obama, where she says, "Even when it's not pretty or perfect, even when it's more real than you want it to be, your story is what you have, what you will always have. It's something to own." And I thank God I've taken ownership, but I want to encourage all of you on the phone. I know I'm not the only one in this Zoom that's been through something, but I want to encourage you to walk in your greatness. There have been times where I felt, am I doing what I should be doing? Or, I may go back and forth as far as just being, not really proud of my past, but I can't let the devil play with my mind because I know I'm not that anymore. And I've transformed, and I just continue to encourage everyone to walk in your greatness. So thank you so very much for having me. I'm going to introduce Tim Thompson, who will begin the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kemba, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you for your time and your spirit, your energy, your presence. I think your narrative truly saves lives, as many people have commented on our group chat this afternoon. So I can't thank you enough. This is the time I would normally ask for another round of applause, but in this medium, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself to everyone. I'm your youth moderator for today. My name is Taylor Thompson. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a current master's student at Columbia University. I graduated from Barnard College last fall from my living room, and I majored in economics and social history. I was really moved to be a part of this afternoon, just to kind of continue the narrative of how, as a recent college graduate, how we can better cultivate our skill sets for taking care of ourselves and for taking care of our loved ones and our community once we enter any higher education space or any space that we must enter as we are ushered into adulthood. So before I introduce our Q&A for the afternoon, I want to tell everybody about the next raffle winner, the giveaway winner. Sorry, harsh segue, but I wanted to congratulate our giveaway winner, Christian Collins. So big theoretical round of applause. Congratulations for your win. I also want to introduce another member of our panel this afternoon, Dr. Martin Hill. And thank you so much for attending and for taking this time with us. Dr. Martin Hill is an Indianapolis-based psychologist with over 25 years of clinical experience working in mental health. He has taught psychology at the undergraduate and graduate levels and currently works supporting school staff and administration in school-based programs, adult and child health. Dr. Hill has a BA in psychology from Indiana University, a master's in counseling, and a PhD in philosophy and counseling psychology from Michigan State University. He is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity and the Alpha Eta Boule. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Martin Hill.
Thank you for the invitation. I thank all of my fellow colleagues who have shared information, have encouraged all of the young people who are on. Special thanks to Sherman Wise Thompson for inviting me, and all of the wonderful ladies of the Chicago chapter of the Links. I appreciate that. And Kemba, your story is powerful, your story is moving, and most important, your story needs to be heard by others so that they can learn from what you have learned, and I thank you for sharing that with them.
I want to start with a question that I have for both of you as people continue to populate some more questions for the two of you. And, as you were giving your wonderful presentation, I started to, wonder about the specific implications of self-esteem cultivation and maintenance, during the pandemic. I think this has been such an isolating time for me as a student and as a young person. And so a question that I'd love both of you to kind of speak to is, how do we maintain that kind of work, that self-work during such an isolating time?
Kemba, please, I would like you to go first.
Thank you. So initially with the pandemic, I kind of had to go back to my roots. And this is, for me, because I was incarcerated, I was put in a situation where my whole way of living changed. And so I had to try not to let fear, anxiety, take over and to hope and pray and have faith that things would get better. So for me during the pandemic, and I would encourage for young people, is number one, you need to make sure that you unplug. You know, we didn't have social media when, you know, I was your age. And it's not even just for young people, it's for adults too. Because some of the time we could get so caught up in scrolling and seeing some people going ahead with their life, or, you know, having opportunities, but yet you may be, you know, having difficulty. And, you know, people only put on social media what they want to put on social media. So to me, some of the time it can be anxiety inducing. And so you need to make sure that you unplug. But for me, also through my own individual experience, I realized that my walk is my walk. And so therefore, I can't compare myself to what other people are doing, what opportunities other people have, that I have to be okay and stay in my lane. But oftentimes, young people and adults can get caught up in that scroll and see other things. And I just, again, encourage people to just unplug and make sure you're having self-care. I mean, for me, you see, I've got my candle, my scents in the background. Like, there are times in this pandemic where you just have to kind of trust and pray and believe that things are going to get better, instead of just sitting there watching the news, hearing every dreadful thing that's going on. And also make sure you have a good group of people that you can connect with through this time.
Kemba, you bring up a very good point that, Taylor, to answer your question about, you made the comment around self-care. So I would definitely highlight the importance of self-care. Now, this can be as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. We all can engage in that. And doing a little homework and doing a little research around it, I'll even throw out a simple to-do list, if that's okay and if that's in order. I'll give you a couple of suggestions of ways you can take care of you. The end game is going to be, I will always ask, if there's no one else around, is there at least one person you like hanging out with? And it's always kind of a perplexing question. And I'll say, well, that person would be you. So if you don't like hanging out with you, or you haven't gotten in touch to know who you are, that might be the first person I might start getting to know a little bit better. So if I throw this out to you, I think it's beneficial if very simple things. I know you've heard this before, something as simple as exercising. And I'm not saying we got to go to the gym and you're trying to become all buff and all built up or anything. I'm just saying 5 or 10 minutes of a walk, 5 or 10 minutes of doing some type of physical exercise. It gets those little endorphins and all that adrenaline that goes on in your head that motivates. When that starts to motivate you, it changes your mood. Changes your mood, makes you feel better. I'd say something else, Kemba, you commented a great deal on your faith. Every day I read the Bible. Every day I think it's helpful. That's time for you, time for yourself. Reading a passage, reading a chapter. You know what? I give you a challenge. Just pick one of the books, read it all the way to the end. Read a chapter a day. You'd be surprised what you might find. Say a prayer right after you read. And then to add one, as you were commenting, Kim, about social media, you know what? Let me tell you the social media that's good for you. YouTube can be your friend if you try to use it the right way. So what if you YouTubed inspiration? What if you looked up motivation? I've got a ton of motivational quotes, or I've got a ton of motivational speakers that I go back, that these are men from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that wrote books that we still use today, because the premise and their concepts still apply. But if you sat and listened to a motivational comment or two, or listen to something inspirational, gives you a Bible verse, gives you a quote for the day, and you just think on that through the day, you would be surprised how that can pick up your mood and change your outlook. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And
Not a
thank
problem.
you everyone for populating these wonderful questions. We so appreciate them. I'm seeing a lot of people looking back to a specific moment in your speech, Kemba, and you note the red flags that are at times really apparent and at times are kind of obfuscated And a lot of people are wondering, you know, what are some specific red flags that people can think about when navigating any kind of intimate violence?
Well, Dr. Hill, I'm gonna let you. I'll go first because I'm sure my comments will be limited versus your professional expertise. But
I'll do the best I can to support.
yes, yes. Certain signs to look at. I mean, abusers typically want you to themselves. They want to pull you from your social connections because they want to manipulate, your mind. And oftentimes, they could have low self-esteem issues themselves. For instance, if it's a person in a relationship and they're doing well and they're with this abuser, they may talk down to them because, they've got stuff going on, but, and moving forward and doing what they need to do with their future. But the abuser, could be, not doing the right things or not on the right path. So they'll try to demean you, make you feel less than in order to make them feel superior. So one of the things is that they'll try to pull you away from your family and friends and just keep them to yourselves. And, I definitely think that, there's several things that you can look out for. But one of the things that I think is really important is just loving you enough not to lower your standards, your morals, and what you know is right. I was always like the peacemaker. And let me not leave this out. I also, I cared about him. But I also thought, well, and I know none of the more mature women on the call have ever been in a relationship like this and thought this, but I thought to myself, well, maybe if I stay with him, maybe I could change him. And somewhere along the line, I forgot that Gus and Odessa Smith, my parents didn't send me to Hampton University to convert some drug dealer thug into being a law-abiding citizen. So one of the things that we have to look at is ourselves and what our expectations are, and understanding our own self-worth to kind of eliminate some of those red flags. Because when the red flags come up, like you said, sometimes you may just ignore them because you're happy to be in a relationship when you should value yourself enough to understand you deserve better.
So let me add a little more to that. And I would say, keep one thing in mind, as I mentioned earlier, if there's no one else who you spend time with and there's no one else you know any better, trust that you know yourself. And more importantly, we all, especially as people of color, especially being African American, we have a spidey sense, a sixth sense. I know it sounds a little funny and it's not a technical jargon term, but we do have a sixth sense. You know in your gut, this feels right or this feels wrong. And you kind of know when it feels right or it feels wrong. If you're thinking it, it's well enough to question. If it doesn't feel right, it's well enough to walk away from. It's not an easy, and I will never say that it will be easy. But if you're in tune with yourself enough to, when that spidey sense and that question comes up, is this right or is this wrong? And you get that feel and it just doesn't sit well, trust in it enough to follow it. And follow it enough to seek out, is there one person? We all have at least one. It's either mom, it's either dad, it's either a coach, it's a professor, it's a minister, it's someone that gives you at least an unbiased and objective opinion that, hey, I had this thought and I felt this way. I hope I can share it. You don't need to tell the world. And Kemba, don't take it the wrong way. I applaud you for doing the actual opposite of what I just said. But what I mean is, you don't have to tell the world, but you need to tell someone. And I say that in all sincerity and honesty. We all have great ideas and we all know how to figure things out. And I say all of us can make great decisions. And sometimes when you've got one more person just about something off of that you feel connected to, that you know values you, key phrase, values you, please share, please open up, and please let that out so that someone else can then, you've extended the olive branch, now let them take it and help you with it.
And one of the things that I want to mention from the chat, Ole Yinka Hassan, you know, she's telling me, don't judge yourself because you care for another human, thinking it was true love. It's okay. And I think while I was incarcerated, there was an expert, Beth Ritchie was her name, and she's actually out of Chicago, University of Illinois, Chicago. She's a domestic violence expert, and so she came into the prison as part of LDF's team, and she helped me understand that what I did in being human and naturally loving and giving as a woman wasn't wrong. And so that I needed to not judge myself for that and kind of let it go. But you do have to, at some point, recognize those signs and love yourself enough to realize that it's time to move on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. In line with, what it means to reach out and seek counseling, we have a good question around, what advice you might have to people who are perhaps fearful of attending counseling or of asking for help. Do you have any advice?
Well, the thing I have to say is my parents, after my parents found out that I was on birth control in college, they sought out a counselor for me. And I can remember being so upset and angry because I was just like, why are my parents tripping? I don't need to go see a counselor. And I went in that counselor's office, arms crossed, attitude, not wanting to talk. And I didn't share what I was experiencing, the insecurity, the low self-esteem. And so ultimately, had I dealt with some of those issues then, I maybe could have prevented what was ahead. And so what I would say is let that fear go. What you should fear is what could happen if you don't deal with some of those insecurities, some of those things that's going on in your head, your heart, your spirit. And I'm a strong proponent of counseling. And, you were able to see my son in the video, but my son is now 26 years old. He's actually living in the Netherlands, completing his graduate degree. And I'll at another time I'll share about him. He's amazing. But even in raising him, it was important for us to go to counseling. And so oftentimes, again, there's sometimes, parents that may be listening to this that, don't want to go to a counselor if their kid is, emotional or something's going on with them. But if you don't deal with it then, it could have some long-term consequences for them later on in the future. So fear that more.
I would definitely add that I'll describe it this way. I would say we all have a good friend. We all have a close friend. Hopefully most of us all have a best friend. I would say the difference between your best friend and your counselor is your best friend gives you advice. Your counselor listens to your concerns and helps you navigate what's standing or what's placed before you. We're the next best friend you just haven't met yet. And in fairness, we're concerned about what is in your best interest. And it is sometimes a little bit of challenge to find someone who's truly centered on what's in your best interest. And that's what I think any and all in my profession are trying objectively and ideally to do. Yes, there are challenges with finding the right therapist. There are challenges with finding the right fit. There is a personality, just like in a relationship. There's a personality and it has to click. But more importantly, I would encourage you, if you don't feel comfortable yourself, who's that best friend? Ask that best friend, ask that parent, ask that coach, ask that teacher. Can you come with me? Just so you have your support when you start, and then you'll have your support once you build that relationship with your therapist.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions, I suppose, perhaps from those parents who are hoping their children will come to them. What advice do you have for parents with kids heading to college in particular to prepare them for those scenarios?
Be open-minded to any and all conversations. We all have gone to college, or you understand my point. We've all been teenagers and now we're grown. So we've all gone, we've finished high school and we've gone to do something else. So our lens and our perspective will be different. So be open to all conversations. And the best conversation to have is the one that they start with, and you just encourage them to keep talking. As long as you keep the lines of communication open, you will always benefit. Whatever the surprise, whatever the shock, whatever the worry is, the both of you or the group of you collectively will come up with a great idea to solve it. But be open to, you might hear a funny comment or a strange conversation start. Don't shut it down. Encourage it to continue.
Yeah, and I totally agree. In raising my son and him going off to college, you know, it's been a process. And one of the things that I've learned is just the importance of listening. And I think, you know, Dr. Hill, you know, definitely emphasized that because, you know, as parents, you know, once we hear something, we want to fly off the handle and, you know, give our input, what we think. But sometimes we need to just encourage them to keep talking. And sometimes in that conversation, by you asking certain questions that's not pushing them or judging them, by asking certain questions, it causes them to see themselves. And you not even have to tell them that they recognize on their own what's right and wrong and what they need to do. But that's only come from therapy. I've grown to learn that for myself.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I don't want to continue asking the same question, but people are asking really nuanced questions in that same capacity. And one is asking, you know, particularly when it comes to teenage girls who, how do we have conversations about, you know, protecting oneself and one's community while also, you know, seeking new experiences, and that college was a lot of that. But how do you toe the line? How do you have that conversation?
I have a 10-year-old daughter. I think while they're still young, just making sure that you expose them. Maybe you watch certain movies or read certain books together so that you can have open and honest, you know, conversations about various subject matters. But you do want them to know the fullness of life because you don't want them going on a college campus or moving forward in life and not be exposed. And then once they're exposed, they're like, hey, you know, I've never experienced this, and go off, you know. So you want to make sure you're having, you know, those open conversation with them. And then for me, even though I went to Hampton University, and you know, we got different universities that think they're the real HU and all of that. But for me, even going to a historically Black university and going to predominantly white schools before then, I really didn't know my history and culture the way that I needed to. And I think it's really important, especially in the midst of the social justice and the things that we've been experiencing during this pandemic, that we tap into those experiences from the past, historic, because ultimately, even if we talk about girls and Black women, and if you understood the trauma of what we've been through as Black women, and with this being Black History Month, the trauma of what we've been through, I think we're in our time as Black women. So we have to set an example for other Black girls. But I say that I think it's taken us some time to own our greatness, to embrace our trauma, to embrace our experiences. But look how great we are. And I think young girls need to realize that even though they can't see it, they don't know what's going to happen, that you can walk in that past greatness of history and hearing other people's stories, learning other people's stories, and understand just what greatness is ahead of you. And you can get a piece of that American pie, American dream too, but you just have to persevere. And even when you can't see it, have hope and faith that you will be able to make a difference. And it's we the people, you know, it's up to young people to make our country greater than what it is. So I just encourage young girls to just, know that they have that greatness in them. And as they keep walking forward, that they will be able to succumb whatever comes their way, and that they will continue to advance as long as they continue to excel and be persistent, not be quick to give up. Don't let a relationship trip you up because you're so in love. No, focus on that goal, dream, that love, that career, that business, whatever it is, and you continue to walk in your greatness as well.
I'd probably say for young men and young women, all of the preteens, teens to going to college, you all have a sense of confidence and a sense of the view of yourself, how you see you, how you feel about you. Your parents have the same view. They describe it differently, but you're both on the same page. I think when you go off to college, parents, be open to developing that new relationship, that new chapter in the parent-child interaction where your child's an adult and still needs your help. And you can still be supportive and let them learn what they need to learn, sometimes scrape their knee or make a mistake, and be there to pull them back if you know they're a little too close to the edge. And you know how you learn how to navigate and maneuver this new development of this relationship. But I think the most important thing is how you viewed you. If you were successful going and preparing to go to college, you continue to still be successful. Why? There's still some core things that made you you. Don't deviate. And if you notice you're deviating, reset. Reset could be talk to someone. Reset could be go home for a quick weekend and be like, hey, mom, hey, dad, what am I doing? Here's what's going on. And this is where mom and dad listen and say, hey, it's all right. Let's get you back in focus. But it's going to be communication, but at worst, do not lose. There was something that made you you when you prepared to go to college. You haven't lost it. It just grows and develops. So if you haven't connected with it, connect. If you feel you're veering away from it, pull back to it, because that's still what's going to make you successful. And that interaction from parent to child as the child is getting older, now that it's an adult child, is just going to grow and enhance, because now you're going to have the other sets of conversations that parents may dread, but look forward to having, because they know their child is demonstrating some maturity and curiosity so that they can continue to grow and develop.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As you both kind of refer to these really robust moments of teens and young people talking to their parents, I remember being a teenager myself, having it only been about 4 years ago. And I imagine that it sometimes is difficult to even imagine those conversations. Like, how would they even happen? I remember them kind of being outside of the scope of what I could even see. Can you speak to kind of the experience of talking to your parents about what was going on when it finally happened, that you had the opportunity and the will to speak to your parents about that?
So I'm trying to make sure I understand where you're coming from. You know, while I was going through my ordeal, I didn't go to my parents. And it really wasn't until the Emerge article came out when my parents knew the big complexity of what I had gone through. And so I know my parents sensed something that was going on. And I think, sometimes parents are scared that if they say something that they may push their kid away. And I know that's something that me and Dr. Hill were just talking about. But I'm not saying don't be scared to entertain the conversation. And again, not from a judgmental type way, but just to kind of know what's going on with your child. And I guess starting those relationships early, to have that open communication, can help facilitate that. But again, you may, and you want to be real. I mean, you may, and Dr. Hill, you correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if they're in that college setting, like one of the things that I normally share is like my mom was from Danville, Virginia, a real, country Southern town. And my dad was her first everything when she went off to Norfolk State University. And my dad, he was probably one of the biggest playboys on Norfolk State's campus. But, you know, he wanted to protect me. So he didn't really sit me down and talk to me about, you know, some guys only want this, or you need to protect yourself from that. And so I just, again, strongly encourage to have those, what's the word? The uncomfortable, you know, conversations with your kids to make sure that they'll understand that you're open to anything that may come forward in college life, or even if you're not in college, that you'll be open to actually hear and not try to dominate the conversation.
I would say to all the parents, use the 1 in 10 theory. So the 1 in 10 is you're going to ask a question in some version or some form 10 times. 9 out of the 10 times, your child may give you some kind of an answer. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give you the full story. They may just give you a piece or a portion. But that 10th time when you ask, whichever 1 in 10, whenever it happens, you're going to get the whole story. And then you're going to know what's been going on and what's been going on in their head and how they've been managing. And they're not coming for pointing the finger or judgment. They're coming for support and understanding. And ideally, the 2 of you or the 4 of you or however many of you all work together to make this work, fix, put it in the right perspective, move it forward. I say that in the same way, if any of the kids who are on, any teens, male, female, any college students that are on, when you ask your parent or say something to your parent, use the 1 in 10, because you may have to say it 8 or 9 times that they kind of catch on, but don't catch on. And then eventually when they do catch on, and then you just need to say whatever you need to say and feel comfortable that you can share it. If your parent's not interested, trust me, you would know. And if they keep looking at you like, what are you talking about? They want to hear more. Use that little subtle hint to just keep trying and say a little more and say a little more. It's the same way when we practice stuff and, you know, learn things in school. The more times you rehearse it, the simpler or the easier it becomes. So the more times you keep practicing trying to say it, eventually it will all come out.
That is excellent, because after sharing everything and coming out from prison, and, you know, I'm very fortunate. I have the best parents ever. They're still 110% supportive, but there's nothing I wouldn't tell my parents now. So parents, be careful, because you might start wishing, hey, I wish they wouldn't tell me so much. But yeah, that is excellent points, Dr. Hill. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. I want to be conscious of time, and so I'm gonna kind of close with 2 last questions here. The Links have asked me to feature a question, particularly to Kemba. Can you speak to what it was like the first day that you arrived in prison, and kind of how you've dealt with that trauma since? Sorry, that's a very robust question, but yeah, it was certainly featured.
Yeah. For those of you all that haven't seen Ava DuVernay's The 13th, I strongly encourage you to watch it. I believe it's probably still on Netflix, but it talks about the 13th Amendment, and basically the 13th Amendment, I don't know verbatim, but it said that slavery was illegal in this country with the exception of if you commit a crime. And so going into the system and being told when to get up, when to go to bed, when you can eat, it was the most oppressive, closest thing that I could experience to what our ancestors went through. And so first going into the system, I was scared. I was hurt. I was not knowing when I was going to be able to touch my, hold my son again. And so I did lean a lot, on my faith. And, just to be real about the conversation too. I mean, I had seen and heard prison shows of, things that go on. And again, I just thank God for him, protecting me in the facilities and places where I was housed. But ultimately, I realized, and I encourage anyone to go visit a prison. I mean, if you don't have a family member that's incarcerated, well, then be a part of a prison ministry or group that goes in, because I guarantee you, if you were to go inside a facility, that you would see someone who mirrors you, who just made a poor choice. And so I did find out that where I was, there were so many women who were just like me. And that's why it was really important for me to come out and be a human face for prison reform, for change in policy. But going inside, it's made me who I am today. And I just want to encourage too, because I know Dr. Hill mentioned, how you can make a decision, you can be involved in something and fall, and you just have to make sure that you get back up and move forward and learn from that experience. But in the formerly incarcerated community, there's an organization called Just Leadership USA. And before people go into the system, a majority of the people that go in have already experienced trauma, already had significant hardships. And then you go into the suppressive setting where there's more trauma. And so I encourage you to go on Just Leadership's website, because there are leaders, and I was part of the 2019 cohort. There are leaders across this country who are formerly incarcerated who are leading prison reform, drug policy, criminal justice initiative across the country. So, I don't want people to have this misconception, because you can see things on TV and everything. But what I want you to know, as we move forward in this space of criminal justice reform and social justice and racial equity, what I feared when I first went into the system, number one, what everyone in our communities need to realize is that people are human first. And so therefore, we need to recognize that maybe what we're doing in this country isn't the best thing as far as over incarcerating individuals when they've already been traumatized. And so I know I'm going around about, but I hope that you all can join a later discussion where we are talking about criminal justice, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions. But initially going into the system, I was fearful, but going into the system created who I am today. It helped me understand my purpose. It helped me understand leading our people. And so I'm just glad that God turned it around so that I could have this second chance and I could have an impact with people that I'll never know who I made an impact with through sharing my story.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if I may ask, I know a lot of people are curious about, what kind of conversations you were able to have with your son as he got older, and what kind of, I think that's the question, just what kind of conversations.
Right. So during this presentation, my mom texted me and she was just like, "You didn't say anything about Armani." So Armani, he has a story that he has to tell, that he doesn't have to, but he has a tremendous story. So my parents raised him, and I remember where I didn't want anybody telling him something that he didn't already know. So I can remember a prison visit where he came and he was about to start school, and I started asking him, why do you think mommy's here? And he used to travel with my parents, and he saw that video that was played earlier, and there was like gunshots in it, and he remembered that. And so he thought I was actually incarcerated because I had killed his father. And so I had to explain to him, with drug policy and all of that. But my son, like I said, did counseling. you know, he's had excellent opportunities where he, you know, went to undergrad and had a 4-year full scholarship in undergrad. He studied in Oxford, at Oxford University in England. He studied in Madrid, took college courses there. He studied in Nice, France. So I say all that to say that we've had open communication, but we have grown even after he's completed college to have even more deeper conversations of how my incarceration impacted him. And so again, I'm just so very proud of who he is and what he's done. But I share that not to brag, maybe to some of the links, you know, maybe I was trying to brag to them and Dr. Hill as far as all of my son's accomplishments.
All parents are supposed to brag.
Yeah. And so, but I'm sharing it for the young people because I want you to understand that he has a story. I mean, he has a father who was abusive, who killed someone, who, you know, abused his mom. He has a mom who is a public figure that, you know, some of his classmates maybe teased him when he was growing up. But when he was in high school, he came to me and he was like, Mom, I know kids from my school could learn from your situation too. And so he asked me to present amongst his peers. And so that's just the type of character that he has. But he's doing great things. And I'm just very grateful that I understood the importance of counseling, and also that I've opened up as a parent to allow him to soar and not be judgmental or not be overly critical as he moves forwards in life, and let him figure stuff out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Hill, were you saying something? Okay.
No, go right ahead.
Thank you so much for sharing. This has been, you know, just such a wonderful experience. Thank you for letting us into your life in this way. It was, you know, intimate and really, really inspirational. And I want to just second all of the people in the comments who are thanking you and articulating the ways that this narrative really does save lives. So I can't thank you enough. Thank
Taylor,
you so much. Oh,
Taylor, can I say one last thing with that? Because I know there's some young people with my son's father in raising him, and this goes to, you know, dads and moms. I want to go back to the fact that people are human first. And so even in raising my son, I made sure he knew the positive characters of his father. Of course, he knew other things, but I focused on those other things being bad behaviors, instead of demonizing his father, because I didn't want him to feel any less of a man person because of who his father was or what his father did. And so I strongly, you know, encourage those kind of healthy perspectives, because I know there's some young people, you know, that are listening that, you know, they may have parents that aren't as involved or have done things as well, for them not to of a person because of what their parents did or what their parents are or aren't doing, that you can walk in your own greatness, and hopefully God will mend those relationships to what they need to be, or where you're able to take off the chains and shackles and be able to move forward instead of dwelling on negative things that can pull from your self-esteem and self-confidence as well.
thank you. No, thank you for taking that time to speak to that. I really appreciate it. And Dr. Hill, thank you for your time as well.
Always, it's been a pleasure. I thank Kemba. I thank you for letting me share the stage with you.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. I see the Indiana roots, so I lived in the Midwest for a little while, so we may have crossed paths.
Yes, we may have. I wish you nothing but success going forward. You and your son and daughter.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Before we leave, a couple more things. Our LINKS organization is a very, very busy group. We're always developing programming to lift and to inform our community. You don't want to miss the next 2 upcoming programs coming up in March: Women, Mental Health, and the Justice System. featuring Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and, of course, Kemba Smith. Also, March 20th, join us for When Words Fail, Music Speaks, Mind, Body, and Spirit. We just want to thank everyone who joined us today. I think we can all agree that Kemba's story is one that we will not soon forget. Kemba, thanks so much for all you do and for sharing the story of your journey with us. We want to thank Dr. Martin Hill for his valuable clinical contributions, and we hope your comments have encouraged those who need help to do so. Thank you to our shining star, our youth moderator, Taylor Wilson Thompson, for leading our insightful question and answer conversation. And finally, many thanks to the 11th National President of the LINKS Incorporated, Patricia Russell McLeod. And as we all know, to pull off an event like this requires a lot of time, energy, and careful planning. Thanks to our chapter leadership for your support. And special thanks to members of the Speaker Series Committee. And really want to point out that Link Laura Flowers, Link Cheryl Hamilton Hill, and Link Alexandra Daniels of the Youth Committee, who really worked to pull this together, were just tremendous, as well as the entire committee. So we just want to thank everyone, and especially to our youth. Know that we are grateful for your participation. And after all, you should know that we are doing all of this for you. You represent our future. We are working to ensure you have all the tools you need to help make a difference in this world. So on behalf of the Chicago chapter of the LINKS Incorporated, I wish you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us.